They may have a special relationship, but for more than 40 years, the UK has had to trade with the US via the European Union. Now, the two are planning for a future without the middleman. Though it can't sign any trade deals until it leaves the bloc in early 2019, British Trade Minister Liam Fox is in the business of forward planning.
As the UK prepares to leave the European Union, Britain enters a new chapter in our history. And we will do so as proud champions in the cause of global free trade, unashamedly promoting the importance of the rules-based system and helping to ensure that the proceeds of prosperity are distributed to all.
Fox says there's an extra $50 billion to be made in the decade after Brexit if all trade barriers are removed, which underscores the importance of trade between the two allies. The US injects the single most investment into the UK. Both countries employ 1 million employees from the other. While at 20% of exports, the UK sells more goods and services to the US than any other single country. Trade between both countries is worth more than $200 billion a year. That's more than that of France and Germany put together. Even though the UK sells more than it spends in the US, both have contributed around $1 trillion to each other's economies. Former President Barack Obama warned the UK it would be at the back of the queue if it left the EU. With Trump, it's been fast-tracked to the front.
We're working on a trade deal, which will be a very, very big deal, very powerful deal, great for both countries. And I think we'll have that done very, very quickly.
But at what cost? Pro-EU campaigners say the UK could become vulnerable to American intervention, especially when it comes to healthcare. Britain's trade minister disagrees.
As far as our own trading relationship with the EU goes, we begin from a mutually advantageous position. Never before have two parties seeking a new trade agreement begun with the advantages of complete regulatory equivalence and a zero-tariff environment.
The IMF has downgraded growth forecasts for both the US and the UK this year. So for the first and fifth biggest economies in the world, paving the way to sustained growth is crucial, together or not. Adefemi Akinsanya, TRT World.
Now, in addition to the uncertainty surrounding the UK's trade relationships, it's also struggling with higher inflation following Brexit. A new report says British households are spending less as their financial situation deteriorates at its fastest rate in 3 years. Financial data company IHS Markit says its monthly household finance index dropped from 43.7 in June to 41.8. Families are cutting back on big purchases like cars, holidays, and household appliances. Consumer prices rose at their fastest rate in 4 years in May, but slowed down slightly last month. Joining me now is James Butterfill. He's the Executive Director and Head of Research and Investment Strategy at ETF Securities in London. And from Paris, our own Editor-at-Large, Craig Capitas. James, I'd very much like to start with you first. Realistically, what can Liam Fox achieve in his talks with the US at this stage?
At this stage, really very little. I mean, we know that President Trump wants to do deals with Britain, but there's lots of other things in his home turf that he needs to get done, such as dealing with the Affordable Health Care Act, and he hasn't dealt with that. So can he genuinely get something done quickly with the UK? Ultimately, trade deals take many, many years to deal with, and 2 years probably isn't enough.
What about the fears that the US will try to dictate some of its terms to the UK in an eventual trade deal on things like healthcare, food quality, environmental protection, things like that? Could that happen? We've seen something similar to that happen with things like the TTIP agreements between the US and Europe.
Well, just simple game theory detects that. We're in a much more difficult position than the US is. We're trying to do deals with Europe, and we're hoping for a deal in America. So I do expect them to exploit it to some extent, and it is unfortunately damaging corporate confidence in the UK already. We're already seeing signs of weakness of growth. In fact, our own indicators looking at that is a proxy for GDP growth says the UK could fall into technical recession in the coming year. And if you look at when we start to see that growth roll over, it was precisely when the referendum was announced. Ever since then, sentiment, loan growth, real wages, for instance, have been deteriorating. We're now at the point where it genuinely could cause a recession. It's very concerning.
Right. Craig, let me turn to you. Let me put that same question to you. Concerns that the US might try to impose its way on the UK in any trade talks?
You know, as our once upon a time Britain was run by people of some integrity, Brexit has rectified that mistake. We are now left with the good people of the UK going to bed tonight with the assurances that Liam Fox is discussing genetically enhanced parsnips and chlorine-washed chicken gracing the tables of people in the UK. This at a time when 14,000 banking jobs are leaving Great Britain for other places. This 2-year window, these banks are going to have money on the ground. People are going to be gone. Recession, I think, is not the word for what's really going to hit the UK here. If Britain does not rescind this decision to leave the EU through some political mechanism, it's going to be quite a long time before they get their feet back on the ground. You know, the EU means that Britain will no longer be part of more than 600 treaties, you know, that they've signed around the world, more than 34 of them with the US, and all of them most of them revolving around economic issues, which are quite important. And for Liam Fox to say that he's just getting back into the game of doing this sort of thing after 40 years of doing it via the EU, that's like trying to put a positive spin on Dunkirk.
James, let me get back to you. Now, Liam Fox said at this working group meeting, and I quote, "Those who are still intent on trying to thwart the process appear to be dreaming," unquote. Is that the kind of hardline rhetoric that do you think is going to appeal to the Trump administration and make a trade deal more palatable to everybody?
I think we have to kind of take a step back here and see what's happening. Ultimately, that kind of hard talk is kind of interesting, but is it genuine? I mean, I think it's quite a high possibility at the end of the summer we start to see that actually the Conservative Party is really struggling to have effective talks with the EU, making the situation all the more desperate. And we could well end up in a situation where we have a vote of no confidence in the Conservative Party, and we end up having another election. And in that case, there has been a bit of a socialist wave in recent months here. We could well see another general election, and quite likely the Labour Party win, maybe with a coalition with the Lib Dems, and in that case we'd probably see another referendum.
Indeed, yes. Everything does seem to be up for grabs right now. A quick question to you both. James, you first. Do you think the UK is going to have a trade deal after 2 years?
No. I think Brexit is still, the actual Brexit occurring is still very much open.
And you, Craig, trade deal with the US post-Brexit?
No, EU rules mean the UK cannot sign a trade deal until it has left the bloc. So why in God's green earth would the United States sign a trade deal or even negotiate a trade deal until that point? Because if they did, they couldn't suck enough out of the party on the other side of the table. They might do a lot of talking, but there's not going to be no trade deal on the table.
Fantastic. James Butterfill, ETF Securities in London, and Craig Capitas in Paris. Thank you both ever so much.